Hey guys, welcome to The Strong Young Man. Male pattern baldness, or androgenic alopecia, is something that almost every man will have to face at some point in their life. Almost no one will get to maintain a full head of hair until their early 90s, like Ronald Reagan did until his death in 2004. Hair loss can be devastating, as it makes you look older, can take away your identity, and for most people, it makes them look less attractive. There are some people who can look sexy balding, but unless you have a well-rounded head, with ears pinned back enough to not have you looking like Dumbo, balding is something you should endeavour to delay as long as possible. Some people preach that balding is inevitable, and you ought to just shave it. These just shave it bros are not you, and you should only listen to these people if hair loss is something that you just don't care about. Remember that they aren't the ones living with your experience of balding for the rest of their lives. You are. If your hair is important to you, then I believe investing into yourself to preserve your hair as long as you can. If you catch balding early, you can reverse it to a significant degree, and you can delay losing your hair by several decades. This will buy you enough time to get to a point in your life where you become comfortable accepting the permanent loss of your hair. Just understand that in the long run, you are fighting a losing battle, even with the best protocol. Balding occurs because hair follicles thin out over time. Diffuse thinning of the hair follicles occurs because of a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, which binds to the receptor sites in the oil glands of the hair follicles, causing them to shrink. DHT is synthesized from testosterone, which is why balding mostly affects men. In order for testosterone to be converted to DHT, enzymes called 5-alpha reductase are needed. These enzymes are stored inside of the hair follicles' oil glands. Hair loss is affected by DHT because this hormone causes follicles to miniaturize and shortens their lifespans, eventually causing them to stop producing hair altogether. DHT's effect on an individual will vary according to several factors, including how much testosterone is in your body, the proportion of testosterone then converted to DHT, usually somewhere between 5 to 10%, the proportion of available DHT to bind to the receptor sites in the hair follicle. Not all DHT in the body is usable, most of it's actually bound to sex hormone binding globulin. DHT's binding affinity to the receptor sites, largely determined by genetics, and the effect that bound DHT has on the hair follicles, which is also largely determined by genetics. At puberty, increased levels of testosterone mean that more dihydrotestosterone will be synthesized. Because of this, male pattern baldness can actually start as early as puberty for some young men. I've heard of boys as young as 8 showing signs of diffuse thinning. Thinning usually appears in distinct patterns that include a receding hairline and a thinning crown. This is because the temples and the mid-anterior scalp are thought to be the most sensitive to DHT's effects. Understand that hair loss is always happening. Everyone, man or woman, is constantly shedding hair. If your hair loss is occurring at a rate less than your hair growth, then you'll be able to maintain your hair. Anything that has androgenic properties will make you lose your hair, not just DHT, but by slashing your DHT, the most powerful endogenous androgen, you give yourself the best chance of minimising your rate of hair loss. Once you have minimised the rate of hair loss, you can begin to maximise the rate of hair growth, and this is the best formula for retaining your hair. Step 1. Minimising hair loss. In order to minimise hair loss, the best thing that you can do is to minimise the effect that androgens transcribe to the hair follicle. Using a selective androgen receptor antagonist locally on your scalp is one strategy you can use. RU58841 is one such compound that has emerged over the last few years. It binds to the androgen receptor locally on your scalp, preferentially over testosterone and DHT. This means that less hair follicle miniaturization is occurring. Another way you can do this is to hinder the body's ability to produce the most potent androgen, DHT. The best way to do this is to block the activity of the 5-alpha reductase enzymes. Saw palmetto extract is one herb that can block the activity of this enzyme by about 30%. For some people with less aggressive hair loss, a 30% reduction in your DHT will be enough for you to hold onto your hair. Finasteride, sold under the brand name Propecia, inhibits the activity of type 2 and type 3 5-alpha reductase enzymes by about 65%. In Australia, finasteride costs about $20 a month. For most people, 1mg of finasteride per day will block the activity of this enzyme to a sufficient degree to reverse hair loss. If you have really aggressive hair loss, finasteride will only slow down the rate of hair loss, and for these people, dutasteride, which inhibits all 3 types of the 5-alpha reductase enzymes by about 98%, is a better option. Generally, the earlier your hair loss starts, the more aggressive the hair loss will be, and the more likely you will need to use the more potent 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, dutasteride. If you have even further hair loss after using dutasteride, then you may need to use RU58841 locally on your scalp in combination with your dutasteride. If this is still not enough, especially if your hair loss hits you young, then maybe it's time to play with the cards that life dealt you and just shave it, bro. 5-alpha reductase inhibitors do not interact with any other medicine. They have a small increase in muscle composition and a negligible effect on performance in the gym. Long-term treatment of 5-alpha reductase inhibitors has also been shown to reduce the overall risk of prostate cancer. For most people, finasteride and dutasteride are well tolerated, but blocking DHT systemically rather than selectively will mean that DHT is not available to transcribe its effects to other organs of the human body. This means that you can expect the following: reduced testicular size, reduced ejaculate volume, and less oily sebaceous glands. Additionally, a very small percentage, less than 1%, will develop other side effects such as sexual dysfunction, tender breast tissue, and tender prostates. This is something you'll have to try to see if you react this way, but every person I've spoken to in the industry says that these side effects disappear upon cessation of the dose. Something to note is that these drugs are not suitable for men who haven't gone through puberty. The hormonal changes cause permanent disruptions to their development. Unfortunately, for the young men who lose their hair during puberty, your hair loss is almost inevitable, but you can slow it down by maximising hair growth. Step 2. Maximising hair growth. Nutritional deficiencies will result in a reduced rate of hair growth. Most specifically, deficiencies in zinc, iron, selenium, vitamin A, vitamins B3, B7 and B9, vitamin D3, vitamin E, fatty acids and deficiencies in protein will all result in less hair growth. Make sure you consume a sufficient intake of these nutrients in order to maximise your hair growth before chemical intervention. Eating healthy also indirectly minimises the DHT that your hair follicles are exposed to. Not all DHT in the body can bind to the receptor sites in the hair follicle. A lot of DHT is bound to sex hormone binding globulin, and having healthy levels of this protein in the blood will slow down the rate of hair loss. A healthy liver produces healthy amounts of sex hormone binding globulin, but it can't do this as effectively if fatty deposits are present in the liver. Alcohol and fructose induce insulin resistance in the liver and will reduce the levels of sex hormone binding globulin in the blood, which means less DHT is bound to this protein and free to transcribe its effects to hair follicles. Higher levels of sex hormone binding globulin correlate with greater health, less incidence of disease, and is the best natural way to retard hair loss. Another strategy to maximising hair growth is to ensure that your scalp is kept clean to enable new hair to grow through. A good anti-dandruff shampoo like Head & Shoulders will contribute positively to hair growth. The conditioner will hydrate and fortify the hair and keep it healthy so the hair follicles don't break as easily. Note that any activity that dries out the hair and weakens it, such as hair straightening or blow drying, will cause the hair to become dry, brittle, and then snap, which will reduce your hair follicle density. To further encourage hair growth, chemical intervention can be deployed. Minoxidil is an oil that is applied topically directly to the scalp on the area that you want to regrow hair. Minoxidil increases blood flow to the area that it's applied, so that it will thicken the hair shaft and thus make it less susceptible to breaking. It also extends the hair follicle life so that it stays around longer, increasing hair follicle density. The oil needs approximately 1 hour to fully absorb, and you can't touch the area until it dries. This means that minoxidil should not be applied before bed, before you sweat, or before you go in the shower. Wearing hats or beanies is also discouraged until the oil has been fully absorbed. Minoxidil does cause my scalp to become itchy and flaky, a side effect that's seen in approximately 30% of individuals. Experimenting with other anti-dandruff shampoos, such as Selsun Gold, can reduce scalp irritation. Increasing blood flow to the area of concern by any means will increase hair growth. Another common method that you can deploy is derma rolling. Derma rolling is a form of controlled injury which uses a derma roller with tiny microneedles to puncture holes in the skin. Using a derma roller in combination with minoxidil can yield an effect far greater than the individual practices do separately. The microtraumas from a derma roller will elicit an inflammatory response by the body which will increase blood flow locally. Increased blood flow will mean more nutrients and growth factors reach the area that you want to regrow your hair. This concept can be used anywhere on the body where cellular repair is desired. Microneedling can be used on your face to clear up acne, and it is also the main principle behind the effectiveness of dry needling and wet cupping. The takeaway message from this episode is that you need to be proactive in your hair loss regime if preventing hair loss is important to you. The first stage of grieving hair loss is to deny that it's happening, but denial won't reverse your hair loss. Be open to the fact that you might be prone to hair loss because time is of the essence here. Get in early to stop the progression in its tracks. Once the hair follicles are dead, they cannot come back. Most of the time, you'll be able to grow most of the hair follicles that have been minimised or that have recently gone dormant, but this is as long as they aren't dead yet. As soon as you notice diffuse thinning, you should be looking into this if you want to keep your hair long term. Finasteride takes several weeks to reach its full effects, as you need a large portion of the DHT in your system to be metabolised and excreted. It then takes several more weeks for the dormant hair follicles to regrow to a level that's noticeable. A noticeable improvement can take up to 6 months. You'll need to be actively managing your hair loss for as long as you want to keep your hair. There is no shame in beginning your hair loss prevention protocol. Your propensity to lose hair is largely genetically predetermined. Ultimately, if it makes you feel better and more confident, then it's well worth the price. Thanks for watching today's episode. In episode 87, I'll go through your actual protein requirements. Subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when it drops. Catch you then.